After that U.S. Threat that emerged this week over missile supplies, Israel says 50 aid trucks have entered northern Gaza now. Washington, through its ambassador to the United Nations, cautioning its ally to stick to its word. Selena Sykes has more.
Emergency services in Jabalia overwhelmed by civilian casualties. In northern Gaza, nowhere is safe from Israeli airstrikes. Not even the school where this heavily pregnant woman was taking shelter. An increasingly desperate situation that has pushed the United States to give its ally Israel perhaps its strongest warning yet.
We are writing now to underscore the US government's deep concern over the deteriorating humanitarian situation in Gaza and seek urgent and sustained actions by your government this month to reverse this trajectory.
The letter, signed by the US Secretary of State and Defense Secretary, has given Israel an ultimatum: radically increase humanitarian access in Gaza within 30 days or face having some military assistance from Washington cut off. It comes as the United Nations and aid groups raise the alarm over their struggle to deliver assistance in northern Gaza, which has been the target of the Israeli army's latest offensive in the enclave for more than a week now. Israel says it's rooting out Hamas fighters who have regrouped in the north, but it's also home to some 400,000 people, locked in a struggle for survival amid dwindling supplies of food and medical aid.
The Secretary General condemns the large number of civilian casualties in the intensifying Israeli campaign in northern Gaza. Humanitarian assistance into Gaza is woefully inadequate and is at the lowest level in months.
The first food supplies in more than 2 weeks were allowed into northern Gaza on Monday, though humanitarian workers say the city of Jabalia, which is also home to a vast refugee camp, remains impossible to reach.
For more, let's cross to New York City. Brett Murphy is a reporter with the investigative news outlet ProPublica. Thank you for speaking with us here on France 24.
Thanks for having me.
You've been working on this story for a little while now, and it's come to a head with that letter that was first published by Axios, but you've already been reporting on a stranglehold on aid into the northern Gaza Strip. Tell us more.
Yeah, so the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, had told Congress back in the spring that it was not the State Department's position that the Israelis were deliberately blocking aid. In other words, military assistance could continue because there's a U.S. law that would require the U.S. government to cut off military assistance if the U.S. government at the same time believes the Israelis are blocking aid. That was back in the spring. When this was important because several bureaus inside of the U.S. government, including USAID and some of Secretary Blinken's own experts, had told him the opposite was true. They told him that the Israelis are blocking aid, military assistance should be cut off. But he made the decision, apparently based on other information, that it wasn't the case.
And you had sources who told you this?
Yeah, in documentation. We had a 17-page memo from USAID detailing all the ways in which the Israelis were blocking and restricting aid into Gaza, as well as email traffic between some of the State Department's own experts coming to a similar conclusion in the spring. When we asked the State Department, why did Secretary Blinken tell Congress what he did, they said that he had input from a lot of different folks and made the call, and they saw the aid situation improving in the spring. In other words, it was working, the pressure that the U.S. government was putting on the Israelis. That's what they told me a few weeks ago as well when I asked them about all this. But in this letter that we're talking about now on Sunday, Secretary Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd told the Israeli government that the humanitarian aid situation is the worst it's been in a year. There's not nearly enough aid getting into Gaza, and they need to dramatically fix the situation over the next 30 days.
And in the article that you published, the tipping point seems to be this so-called general's plan. Tell us about that.
Yeah, there was reporting that Prime Minister Netanyahu was entertaining the so-called general's plan, which would have cut off northern Gaza from food, medicine, supplies in an effort to kind of strangle Hamas militants there. There was a lot of pushback over this plan. I think it was ultimately rejected. At the same time, aid groups, the UN, has been saying that this is the worst it's ever been. Right now, there's not nearly enough trucks that are being allowed in, and September was the worst month for aid in over a year. And all of that was reflected in the letter that Blinken sent to the Israelis on Sunday.
Right. The Israelis who this Wednesday have been stating that they've let in 58 trucks into northern Gaza. We're talking about the north of the Gaza Strip here. Let's take a listen, Brett Murphy, to what the United States' ambassador to the United Nations told the Security Council a short while ago.
A quote-unquote policy of starvation in northern Gaza would be horrific and unacceptable and would have implications under international law and U.S. law. The government of Israel has said that this is not their policy, that food and other essential supplies will not be cut off, and we will be watching to see that Israel's actions on the ground match this statement.
Now, Brett Murphy, we are 2 weeks and 6 days out from a presidential election where you are in the United States. Do you see the Biden administration taking Israel to task?
They've delivered warnings similar to this before, and this letter was very, I think, deliberately worded. They're saying if action is not taken on these concrete and prescriptive measures that were laid out in the letter, then there may be implications to U.S. foreign policy. The spokesperson Matt Miller, State Department spokesperson Matt Miller, was asked about this yesterday in a briefing, and he was asked, what will we do? What if they don't follow each one of the steps? What will happen? And he did not come out and say that this will necessarily mean that we're going to cut off aid. He did not offer a lot of specifics on it. So it kind of remains to be seen exactly how this will be enforced. In the past, a lot of critics have pointed out that red lines drawn by the U.S. administration have been stepped over with few consequences to the Israelis.
Why is that?
It's a good question for the U.S. government, but I think what a lot of people at the State Department tell me is that there's just a policy of largely unconditional aid to Israel and unconditional support. So in a lot of cases we've seen, it doesn't often matter what the Israelis have done. There are certainly, diplomatic conversations happening behind the scenes that I'm not privy to, that a lot of people don't know. And the State Department would say that they are applying leverage all the time. And Miller said as much yesterday. He said this letter is kind of the latest example of all the pressure we've been applying to improve the aid situation. We're constantly assessing it. And this is our kind of latest step to do that. And it's last time we did something like this, it had a net positive and the aid situation increased, and that's what they want to happen again.
And those 50 trucks, is that the start of it?
I mean, the State Department was calling for, multitudes of that, 350 throughout the entire Gaza Strip, over 4 border crossings with the opening of a 5th, as well as several other measures. So, it certainly can be seen as a start, but according to the State Department, there's a long way to go for the Israelis.
Brett Murphy, reporter at ProPublica, many thanks for joining us live here on France 24.
Thank you.